Joining us today from Japan is Dr. Robert Eldridge. Dr. Eldridge is an expert on Japan's security and diplomacy. He's a senior researcher for the Japan Forum for Strategic Studies in Tokyo. Robert, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So next week, Japan is holding elections for the lower house in Parliament. And I know you've described this as the most important election ever for Japan. Why is that?
Yes, so their elections for the lower house will be held on October 31st. And I think the next 4 years are extremely important for the region, and particularly the fate of Taiwan. And Taiwan's security is very much connected to Japan's security and the region's security. The term of a lower house member in Japan is 4 years, unless the prime minister decides to dissolve the parliament. And within Japan, as you know, there are some politicians, not only in the opposition party or parties, but also within the ruling party, who are somewhat pro-China or sympathetic to China. And that has caused a great divide in Japanese politics for much of the post-war years. As you know, as everyone knows, China's intentions towards Taiwan have gotten stronger and stronger. And earlier this year, in March, the outgoing commander for the Indo-Pacific Command made a statement to the U.S. Senate to the effect that China might advance on Taiwan, not only within a decade, but maybe as early as within 6 years. So those 6 years basically overlap with the next term of the lower house, the next 4 years. And I think China's not going to wait for 6 years or 10 years. I think they're going to move very quickly. So I would like to see those that are elected in the upcoming lower house elections here in Japan to solidly be behind supporting or defending Taiwan.
Well, so we'll get to what Taiwan means for Japan and the security in the Indo-Pacific in general in a moment. But just for Americans watching who might not be very familiar with the politics of Japan, who are the major players?
So Japan's parliamentary democracy, and the ruling party has been in, it's called the Liberal Democratic Party, has been in power for much of the post-war years. Unlike, for example, in the United States, where we generally have a change in administrations every 4 or 8 years. In Japan, it tends to be the conservative Liberal Democratic Party that's dominated things. They've had a couple of upsets in the past 30 years, but they've been able to return to power either through a coalition government or through taking power itself again. Basically, for the past 20 years, the ruling party, the Liberal Democratic Party, has been in a coalition with a smaller center-right party called Komeito, and the original meaning of that was Clean Government Party. Unfortunately, though, the Komeito has acted as a brake on much of the legislation that the more conservative Liberal Democratic Party has wanted to pursue, particularly in defense matters. And so a lot of people that support the ruling party are upset about the idea of a coalition government, and particularly a coalition government with a smaller party that's also acting as a brake on it. Altogether, there are about 9 parties in total in Japan, some very, very small, some once quite large that have gotten smaller through attrition over the years. And all of them are battling it out right now in the elections. Because of the size of the smaller opposition parties, they can't be in every single constituency. And so basically, they've come into a sort of like a coalition opposition to coordinate where they're going to fight the ruling party in which district. And so that's kind of where we're at right now. And the campaigning just started on October 19th. So they have roughly a 10-day or 12-day window for the campaign.
A 12-day campaign. That's very different than the U.S.
How can we bring that to America?
I would like to see it, brought to America. There's actually a lot of things that Japan does very well with its elections, and one of it is, I think, the very short, campaign period. There's a great amount of focus on the policy side rather than the personalities.
Shocking.
Last month in September, Japan had a party presidency election for the ruling party. And so that would be the equivalent of one of our primaries back in the United States. And the contrast between the Japanese party primary and a U.S. party primary is staggering. The hatred that is, shot out between, candidates back in the U.S. And basically, can destroy somebody's political career. You don't really see that here in Japan. And particularly this last election in September, there was a great focus on a policy debate. And afterwards, when one candidate emerges victorious, it's always been a male. So he has brought in either all or most of the other rivals into either the government that he forms or the structure of the ruling party. It can get heated, but it doesn't get too personal. And then once things are over, they try to, incorporate both the ideas and the people and the supporters of those respective candidates, back into the fold.
Well, speaking of the focus on policy, I know you consider Taiwan to be sort of like a gauge for politicians in Japan. So why is that so important?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, historically, Japan has extremely close relations with Taiwan. As most of your viewers, will know, Japan occupied Taiwan from 1895 until 1945. And essentially the unification of Taiwan, as you know, there were many different, groups and types of people that were living in Taiwan in the 19th century. They basically formed an identity or a national identity through a central education system that Japan provided. The modernization of Taiwan, the foundations for Japan provided in that period from 1895 to 1945, helped eradicate opium addiction, developed a higher education system, basically helped them, up and down, whether it was in, agriculture or industry, the dam system, the dams, irrigation, Formosan rice, all of these things Japan either brought to Taiwan or helped develop Taiwan. Many of the older generation, still speak Japanese. And President Lee, who passed away last year, had studied in Japan in pre-war Japan, was fluent in Japanese, published in Japanese, read in Japanese. The interactions I had, with him at his home, we did our discussions in Japanese, even though he was fluent in English as well. So there's a really strong connection. The public in Japan very much supports Taiwan and, Taiwan's, autonomy and its future. I would think, or I do think, that the Japanese public is actually farther ahead than Japanese politicians are in some regards. The Japanese politicians are reluctant because of China to take a bold stand on Taiwan, on most things, whether it be Taiwan's admission to TPP or to international organizations, or to have a Japanese version of the Taiwan Relations Act, things like that. And I hope that, at this election, that the Japanese politicians catch up with the Japanese public. So for me, it's a litmus test about whether the politicians first are listening to the public, and secondly, understand that, historically rich connection that Japan has had with Taiwan. And then the most pressing issue, though, is that a contingency in Taiwan will directly affect Japan's security. And whether it's at the outset or partway through. And a vote for Taiwan is a vote for Japan. And if a politician doesn't understand that here in Japan, I don't think he or she should be elected to the parliament.
Is Taiwan part of the discussion that's happening as part of the campaigning for this election?
Not so much, but I've been requesting people to address that or talk about that. And I recently wrote in a commentary, an op-ed in the English language press here. And then earlier this month, I wrote a similar op-ed in the Japanese language in one of their major newspapers to bring attention to that. I also speak at a lot of different lectures and events, and I try to raise that point as well with the audience. As a non-Japanese citizen, I don't think it's my, obviously my right to, interject too far in a Japanese election, but there are people of, similar mindedness when it comes to that.